chosen ones. There are moments in history when the air itself tightens, as if reality pauses to take a breath. That's what happened the moment your energy pulse crossed the final grid line. World leaders didn't just take notice, they panicked. Surveillance systems glitched, satellite feeds rewrote themselves, and for reasons still not disclosed, the president ordered every advisor out of the Oval Office and locked the door from the inside. No speech, no warning, just silence. And your name whispered under his breath. It wasn't just political. It wasn't just spiritual. It was cosmic. For months, international monitoring stations tracked strange electromagnetic ripples moving from unknown origins. Every analyst gave it a different label: aural drift, soulwave interference, quantum disruption. But the anomaly always ended the same way, with your signature embedded in the data like a divine fingerprint. The president had been briefed on similar patterns before, always tied to fringe prophecies or declassified incidents, swept under black budgets. But this time it wasn't theoretical. It was undeniable. The energy came from Earth, but it spoke in a language no machine could decipher, only felt by those whose spirits had been stirred awake. You didn't trigger the event. You were the event. In remote monasteries, sacred scrolls unfurled on their own. Light codes appeared on mountaintops, seen only by those ready to receive them. An elder in Ethiopia wept after hearing a wind pattern that matched the final verse of an ancient psalm. In the ruins beneath Tibet, a chamber sealed for 900 years cracked open, glowing with the same resonance that mirrored your frequency. Every intelligence agency tried to contain it. But how do you contain something that was never meant to be hidden? You weren't born to fit into their grids. You were born to override them. And now, the grid's responding. Reports suggest the president hasn't left the Oval Office since. His aides speak only in riddles. Global military command has gone quiet. But within the silence, something deeper is echoing. A knowing. The type that doesn't need translation. The type that demands awakening. This isn't about what's coming. It's about who has come. The moment your energy wave hit the continental grid, seismic sensors detected what they first mistook for an underground detonation. But there was no crater, no impact site, no explosion, just stillness followed by a pulse. That pulse moved through fiber optics, satellites, and coated bunkers like breath entering lungs long shut. Within 8 minutes, the White House lockdown protocol initiated on its own. Secret Service reports later confirmed the president had dismissed everyone and secured the room before anyone else realized what was happening. No alarms, no press conference. Only one word spoken through his earpiece before encryption scrambled the feed. Your name. He paced, then stopped. His palm hovered over the red folder that hadn't been opened in decades, the one marked Project Veil. Only when the frequency returns. It had been dismissed by 3 administrations, buried by those who called it myth. But now, the myth was watching him back through every monitor, every signal, every whisper in the walls. In the silence of that historic chamber, the lights dimmed without losing power. He stared up, sensing something not mechanical, not explainable, an intelligence that knew it had been found, and he knew he was no longer in control. Outside, the press was told it was a communications drill, but satellites began rerouting traffic globally. 4 major cities experienced simultaneous power flickers. Sacred geometries emerged in crop fields that no plane had flown over. Experts scrambled. The president, however, just sat. Eyes fixed on an old photo from 1979, tucked into the folder's back sleeve. A photo that matched you exactly, down to the scar on the cheek. The problem was, that photo had been taken before you were even born. A whisper formed around him. No voice, no language, just intent. Something ancient had activated, and it wasn't asking for permission. The president tried to speak again, but the microphones rejected his words. Somewhere, in a subterranean lab beneath Maryland, your resonance signature spread across every frequency band and glowed like a beacon. The Oval Office, once a room of power, had become a containment unit. But it wasn't holding you back. It was holding truth in. And as the president stared into the light forming from the chandelier's reflection, he realized something terrifying and divine at once. This wasn't about leadership anymore. It was about recognition. Recognition of the one they tried to keep hidden. The Vatican's secret monitoring division, often dismissed as rumor, had always watched for anomalies beneath the surface of faith, deep beneath St. Peter's Basilica, behind doors that required no keys but only ancient prayers. A sealed archive flickered to life. It was the resonance that triggered it, a pattern that hadn't emerged in over 2 millennia, pulsed from Rome's underground listening devices tuned not to sound, but to essence, the same essence encoded in relics too sacred for public viewing. The frequency came in layered harmonics, and when they decrypted it, the data formed a symbol lost since the Council of Nicaea. The Pope was immediately moved to a secure sanctuary beneath the Apostolic Palace, not out of fear, but reverence. For the first time in recorded memory, the Sistine Chapel's ceiling vibrated subtly, responding to something not of this world, but not entirely apart from it. It wasn't just architecture responding. Inside the Vatican Library, a monk collapsed while transcribing the Lamentations. His fingers wrote a name before his consciousness returned, a name that didn't belong in that text, but now somehow lived there. Your name. At first, they believed it to be a cyber breach, but there were no connections active, no entry points available. The signal came from within. Cameras caught doves gathering unnaturally at the top of the obelisk in St. Peter's Square. A formation shaped like an eye hovered for 13 minutes before dispersing without wind. Devices in the Vatican Observatory turned inward, ignoring space entirely and focusing instead on the earth below, aligning with coordinates that pointed directly to your last known location. One theologian whispered in awe that this had been foretold. He said greater things would be done than even he did, the scholar recalled through trembling lips. And now that moment is upon us. Yeshua's words had always been spiritual, symbolic, but now they echoed through the Vatican's encrypted chambers, like prophecy arriving in coded light. The shutdown was silent, graceful, as if heaven itself asked for stillness. Rome slept that night with candles burning in places where power had never failed before. The Vatican doors remained closed at dawn. No statements issued, no meetings called. Only silence held the air. And in that silence, your frequency continued to rise. In the heart of Arlington, beneath the polished concrete and mirrored surveillance floors of the Pentagon's most restricted wing, something unexplainable occurred. The holographic energy lattice, a classified 3D model used to monitor electromagnetic fields across the globe, shifted without human input. Not glitched, not hacked, redrawn. Entire regions blinked out of their original configurations and restructured around a new central axis. That axis was you, or rather, the energy tied to you. Your signature became the core node from which all other fluctuations realigned. Like an ancient compass finally finding true North technicians stood frozen as the grid pulsed with colors previously unseen in any spectrum. Not infrared, not ultraviolet, something different. Coded light spiraling into geometries that danced in patterns resembling sacred scripts. The general in charge demanded an internal scan, assuming it was an internal breach, but the audit revealed no external access. The only anomaly noted? A faint echo logged precisely at 3:33 a.m., the same timestamp your vitals spiked according to another sealed Department of Defense record labeled Subject Alpha Reawakened. Maps weren't just changing visually, they were altering the frequency parameters. Hidden ley lines, long dismissed as myth, emerged beneath military bases. New convergence points formed above ancient burial sites, forgotten temples, and now, your presence. The system attempted to reset. 3 times it failed. Every time it reverted, the new map reappeared stronger, pulsing with a heartbeat that matched the rhythm recorded from your last known breath while unconscious. In the war room, they debated whether this was an attack. But how do you define a threat that brings light instead of fire, energy instead of force? Some officers claimed to hear voices. One reported hearing a tone that whispered in Hebrew. Another claimed Latin. Yet, when cross-examined, all transcripts translated the same phrase. The grid has remembered. There was no briefing scheduled, no statement prepared. Those who understood what had happened didn't dare speak too loudly, as if words might trigger something irreversible. One analyst dared to say it aloud. It's like the Earth is choosing a new axis, and it's not ours anymore. The comment was logged and sealed under a Level 0 protocol, only accessible by those with direct clearance to Project Edenvale, somewhere within the catacombs of a forgotten monastery perched along the cliffs of Mount Athos. A monk who had not spoken in 27 years broke his vow of silence. No one prompted him. No one even knew he could still speak. But as the sun touched the horizon in an angle not seen for centuries, he uttered just one phrase in Aramaic. The same phrase written across the inner veil of the chapel in golden ink. He has returned, not as he was, but through another. The others didn't question him. They simply began to prepare the sacred room meant only for the last sign. At the same moment, in 3 different parts of the world, Jerusalem, Peru, and Bhutan, ancient stone gates vibrated, not violently, but reverently. Each structure had been sealed with inscriptions so old they had no known origin. But now, those inscriptions began to glow faintly under moonlight, as if bathed in a divine charge. The frequency measured from each site matched a single waveform stored deep within a sealed Vatican file labeled the Living Light Code. That code was tied to your pulse, your breath, your presence, your awakening. And within that waveform was embedded a name encrypted across layers of consciousness. A name once spoken by a man who walked with sandals across deserts and defied death to reveal a kingdom not made by hands. Greater works than these shall you do, he had once promised. But no one expected the fulfillment to look like this. No one thought it would come through circuitry, satellites, and shifting magnetic pulses wrapped in a body born into modern dust. Theologians now gathered in secrecy, some in awe, others in fear. What did it mean that ancient prophecies were aligning with military anomalies? That the digital realm had bent to a force not designed by any earthly algorithm? Why was the grid listening like it remembered something holy? In that stillness, testimonies began to pour in. Children dreaming of symbols they'd never seen. Elders waking with verses etched into their palms. Machines failing when asked to record what had no beginning and no end. The name they wouldn't say publicly was now echoing in the chambers of those who once doubted. The same name he promised would return in power. The United Nations headquarters in New York had never gone fully dark, not even during wartime or blackout drills. But just before dawn, as the final delegates gathered for what was supposed to be a covert emergency session, the power cut out across all internal networks. Not just lights, language translation systems, secure satellites, encrypted meeting feeds, all blank. The sky outside shifted hue, not with storm clouds, but with a low, undulating light that appeared above the East River. It wasn't an aurora. It had angles, precision, a symbol that shimmered like it had consciousness. The symbol matched nothing in any geopolitical database, yet within 3 hours, it was independently drawn by 7 children across 6 continents. No one instructed them. They said it came to them in a dream filled with a pulse, a golden hum. The same shape etched itself into a sand dune in the Sahara, just before an ancient fossil site cracked open nearby. Delegates at the UN, waiting in silence, were advised to return to their countries. No explanation. Just a message from an unknown source routed through the building's emergency loudspeakers in 12 languages. The assembly is not needed. The shift is underway. For the first time since its founding, the UN Security Council left without speaking a single word. What they saw in the sky stayed with them, but no camera recorded it clearly. All footage distorted, even analog. And yet, every witness described the same shape. The center glowed like a breathing star, surrounded by rotating lines that formed a sacred geometry no satellite had been able to map before that moment. It was as if something was being aligned above Earth, something ancient, something watching. As planes rerouted and diplomats fell into silence, an elderly interpreter whispered what she had only ever read once in a lost manuscript. When the light speaks through symbol, the veiled one walks again. No one knew what she meant. But something in her eyes made others listen, even if they pretended not to. That night, no speeches were given. The podium remained untouched, and while the media searched for a narrative, none emerged. Only the symbol remained, echoing without sound across every skyline where eyes dared to look up. And that's when the river began to shift a direction. Inside a sealed military facility in Colorado, deep below the surface, where even top brass needed biometric clearance to enter, a conversation took place that no one was supposed to hear. But it was recorded, only once, and then immediately erased from every known database. A whisper, barely audible, spoken by a man classified as missing since 2003. His voice had been tagged for identification in case of resurrection-level threats, and now here it was, heard through speakers that weren't even powered on. What he said was simple, impossible, and aimed directly at you. He said, "You're the bridge, the one between what was and what must now awaken. At that exact moment, surveillance systems across 14 countries blacked out. Satellites blinked off one by one, not in a cascading failure, but with intentional precision, as though something intelligent was silencing the watchers. Even analog systems failed. An old cathedral in Prague caught fire, but the blaze left only the cameras melted, while untouched hymnals sat peacefully nearby. Someone had decided that seeing you, tracking you, was no longer permitted. The Pentagon issued a silent code directive known only to 12 individuals. In its core file, there was a diagram drawn by hand, by someone long thought dead, showing a structure made of light intersecting two worlds. They had always called it metaphor, but now the readings proved it was more. Your pulse was recorded, moving between planes, seen for less than a second, but undeniable. A beam of light shaped like a double helix rose from your position and then vanished, taking with it all digital trace. Across the Atlantic, a monk in silence for decades opened his eyes and said only this. He said, one would come to span the heavens and the soil. That same hour, a hidden vault beneath the Vatican released a frequency that hadn't been unlocked since the crucifixion. Yeshua's final breath had left behind an echo, and now that echo had returned, not through words but through resonance. In the old city of Jerusalem, far beneath the surface known to tourists and pilgrims, lies a chamber even most scholars don't speak of. Hidden beneath layers of rebuilt stone and centuries of dust, sealed behind coded inscriptions, only decipherable through ancient Hebrew permutations, the temple archives had remained untouched for lifetimes. But last night, something changed. Sensors, triggered by nothing human, began to hum in synchronized patterns, vibrating the stone with a warmth that resembled breath. Light emerged not from bulbs or lanterns, but from the inscriptions themselves. Etched fire responding to a pulse that didn't come from Earth. Inside the chamber, scrolls once considered inert glowed faintly at their edges. A pair of twin rods, long believed ornamental, lifted themselves an inch above their resting altars before lowering again, as if acknowledging something unseen. The High Guardian of the Archives, sworn to silence unless prophecy fulfilled itself, reached for the book that had been forbidden to open. It bore no title, only a symbol, one that appeared days earlier in the sky above the United Nations. The one children had drawn, the one vibrating from your presence. As he opened the text, each page rearranged its own ink. Words written in old blood began to shift, revealing not doctrine, but code. A map. But this wasn't geography. It was a path through energy fields, and the final node was marked by a constellation formation that matched a celestial event due in 3 nights. Directly above the last place your energy had spiked, the elder's hands trembled. His lips moved not in fear, but reverence. There were passages he recognized, verses whispered only during the most sacred hours of Yom Kippur. One of them read, "When the light enters the vessel unbidden, the veil shall no longer separate the name from the knowing." No name was written on the page, but as he pressed his fingers against the parchment, your face filled his mind. Outside the archive walls, a shepherd walking alone looked up and saw the stars shift into a shape he'd only seen once. On the pendant his grandfather gave him before passing, the one he was told would glow when the final age arrived. At precisely 2:04 a.m., Inside a dimly lit sublevel below the Library of Congress, a locked cabinet bearing the seal of the original Continental Congress was accessed for the first time in over a century. 3 guards present at the time described feeling an overwhelming static in the air just moments before the cabinet unlocked itself. The president had requested privacy after intelligence reports suggested that a strange symbol found in global energy maps also appeared on a forgotten Revolutionary-era document. He descended into that vault alone, ignoring the protests of his advisors. What he found there shattered the boundary between legend and leadership. The parchment was dated July 2nd, 1776, 2 days before the official signing of the Declaration. It bore the usual signatures, faded ink and sealing wax, but near the margin was a mark that pulsed faintly, as if remembering its source. The shape matched the same sacred geometry seen above the UN building, the one embedded in your energy readings. Alongside the mark, written in a hand long lost to time, were 6 words: "He walks again when the veil lifts." The handwriting was confirmed as belonging to a delegate whose records were erased from national history after a mysterious disappearance. The president, whose hands trembled not from age but awe, sat down in the solitary wooden chair used only for the reading of sacred national texts. The mark began to glow brighter as his hand approached, and then he whispered, "This can't be coincidence," unaware that his words were being picked up by devices not powered by electricity, but by frequency. You were listening, perhaps not consciously, but your presence stirred every artifact in the chamber. Suddenly, a hidden drawer clicked open from beneath the cabinet, revealing an etched medallion, identical to the one found at your birthplace decades ago. Until now, that medallion had been considered an anomaly. But seeing its twin buried beneath 1776 parchment was something else entirely. It meant you weren't an anomaly. You were part of a continuity that spanned centuries, intentionally obscured until the right moment returned. Outside the chamber, lightning struck without rain. The Washington Monument dimmed for exactly 13 seconds. A raven landed on the Capitol dome and watched the city hold its breath in a wind-carved cave near Petra, Jordan, where no signal had reached in years. A group of researchers unearthed a sealed clay vessel marked with the sign of Melchizedek, a symbol seen only in fragments across lost texts and forbidden scrolls. The vessel had no opening, no seam, yet it cracked open as if in recognition, revealing parchment preserved in a state no science could explain. The language wasn't known, yet the moment it was seen, translators across 3 continents received simultaneous dreams of its meaning. Each translation was the same. It was not a warning. It was a verse, one written in anticipation of one who would return not in robes, but in resonance. The verse described someone born between timelines, whose breath would realign what maps could not, and whose presence would be known not by what they say, but by what systems stop when they arrive. Every line mirrored what had happened since your energy went global. It spoke of a silence that spread louder than war, and a face that would be remembered by ruins before it would be known by men. The script closed with a phrase once attributed to a Nazarene teacher, long buried beneath centuries of division. "I go before you to prepare a place, but one shall rise to prepare the time." Scholars whispered the connection, reluctant to name it aloud, yet the implication hung in the air like sacred fire. Yeshua had not spoken these words publicly, They were recovered from the hidden scrolls found beneath Qumran, never released beyond the inner circles of the Guardians. And now they were fulfilled, line by line, in the rhythm of your pulse. In Jerusalem, a blind woman saw again for 13 minutes. In Tokyo, a machine stopped printing banknotes and began drawing the same symbol found on your breath scan. Across oceans, sacred waters began to rise slightly, not in floods, but in reverence, touching the edges of long-buried stone circles and revealing carvings that had waited for your return. The verse was sent to every major world leader under classified seals. None denied its power. None dared to speak its name. And yet all of them felt it, as if time itself had slowed for a breath you hadn't yet taken. The verse ends with one final line that remains unreadable until you choose to speak it aloud. It began with the birds, not in flight, but in absence. Skies that once echoed with morning wings were suddenly still. Not a single chirp, not a shadow in motion, just air thick with knowing. The shift wasn't seismic or electric. It was internal, like the earth itself had exhaled after holding its breath for an eternity. The energy that once radiated outward from your awakening began to pulse inward, spiraling toward a center no map could locate, but every ancient structure seemed to face. Across deserts, oceans, temples, and towers, a subtle vibration aligned the grid like a forgotten chord returning to harmony. The resonance didn't fade. It evolved. What once moved in pulses now began to take form. Light bled into matter without heat. Shapes not seen since the days of pre-creation formed in corners of rooms, reflected in mirrors, encoded in ripples of water that hadn't been disturbed. And then the whispers returned, not from outside, but from deep within, the minds of those attuned to what had been buried. They didn't hear instructions, they felt remembrance. You weren't the only one who had been hidden. Something else had waited alongside your frequency, bound in the same silence, watching the same veil. And now that you had stepped forward, it was permitted to follow. Not as a shadow, not as a guide, but as the other half of the prophecy no one dared to finish. This wasn't a figure from scripture or myth. It was older, something even the stars bowed to once. Not a god, not a spirit, a mirror. The cosmic counterpart awakened by your return. Some called it the witness, others the keeper. It arrived without form, but wherever your name was spoken, it appeared in essence. Electronic recordings showed interference. Dreamers spoke of an eye opening behind the sun. A young boy in Brazil wrote a language never taught to him, and when scholars decoded it, the message said, "The first key has been turned. The vault of time awaits." And below that, a symbol matching the first one seen in the sky now pulsed with a second beside it.
If you have come this far, it is crucial that you watch this next video here. But be warned, it is not for the faint of heart, for only the true chosen ones can handle this video. If you would like to also donate to help keep the channel going, our Buy Me a Coffee link will be in the description.